Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's Next Round podcast. I'm Rowena Ichon, Senior Vice President, and with me is Tim Anaya, Senior Director of Communications.
Hi, Ro. How are you?
Fine, thank you, Tim. Well, we just finished celebrating National School Choice Week, and our podcast this week is from the webinar moderated by our Senior Director of Education, Lance Izumi, interviewing panelists on the rise of homeschooling.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. It became virtual, by the way, because Sacramento County had this rise in COVID cases due to Omicron. And so we were actually going to have it at one of the schools, one of the charter school or homeschool academies that Lance profiles in his book. But unfortunately, due to COVID, once again, we had to go to a virtual event. But I think it's an interesting discussion that Lance kind of talks about the themes of his book, but then you get to meet some of the real life people he profiles in the book. So he talks to Alicia Carter, who's the principal of the PACT Academy, which is connected to Natoma's charter school. And that's the charter school or a homeschool academy here in the Sacramento area that serves a lot of the homeschool students. And one of the things you learn when you read Lance's book is that it's not just sitting in your dining room having class, that sometimes students will go 1 or 2 days a week to an actual, in-person learning. So you'll meet Alicia. You also meet Carrie Carlson, who's a homeschool charter school teacher. She's profiled in the book as well. And you learn too that there are teaching cohorts and other kind of resources where parents pool together their, for lack of a better term, knowledge base. So, hey, if you don't know calculus, well, maybe you have a parent who does and will teach all, the other kids in the cohort. And then you'll meet Heather Harrison, who is a homeschool parent at one of the homeschools. You kind of learn her perspective and the perspective of what her children have experienced. So it's I think it's an interesting discussion and puts a human face on really breaking down all these myths about homeschooling and seeing all the resources and opportunity that homeschool parents and students have today.
Well, PRI has been a huge proponent of school choice for, probably the last 30 years. And I feel like after decades of struggling and making incremental progress, I really think that we are beginning of a new phase in the school choice movement. The pandemic really highlighted parents, the failures of the public school system, whether it's the curriculum or the power of the teachers' unions in school closures and mask mandates and the overall poor performance of our public schools. So in many states, even blue states, you're seeing parents rising and strongly voicing their concerns, culminating in the election of Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin.
That's right. And you're also seeing, too, that even in blue states like New Jersey, the governor of New Jersey just announced that the school mask mandate is going to end early next month. So you're kind of seeing parents are up in arms. Many people are questioning what's the point of some of these policies, and especially growing recognition of the fact that the ones who are being affected the most are our kids.
I do want to bring up one thing, and Lance Izumi wrote about it, is that there's a bill going through the legislature that's, again, doing everything they can to put more money into our failing school system, which seems to get worse every year. So the latest bill is SB 830, which changes funding in the schools from daily attendance to yearly attendance. So it's a way to bail out schools that had falling attendance during the pandemic. And of course, this wouldn't address the underlying issue, which is why students are truant in the first place. And clearly it won't encourage schools to incentivize kids to come to class.
And for our listeners who want to learn more about that particular bill, our Lance Izumi has a terrific op-ed on the issue that ran a few weeks ago in EdSource. And he explores that very topic, and he makes the case that the focus is always on the money. But he said the people who are pushing that bill and the people who are up in arms about it are not asking that key question. why are students not attending traditional public schools in the numbers we have seen up to now? And it's really all of these issues that we discuss on the podcast, and that have come up in this discussion of education in the era of the pandemic.
So before we go into the podcast, we got a little commercial here. Michael Schellenberger, who is the author of San Francisco, the book on the city and all of its problems, we're going to have him at the Omni Hotel Wednesday, February 15th. It's a luncheon discussion with Michael, and he'll be signing his books. So please come out, save our beautiful city by the bay. And Tim, you've got another announcement, our Sacramento conference.
Yes, we are about a week and a half away from our fourth annual California Ideas in Action Conference in Sacramento. And this is your last call to RSVP. We have a great lineup. Our keynote speaker is Sacramento County District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert. It'll be at the Hyatt Regency across from the Capitol on Thursday, February 17th. And to learn more, to RSVP, go to pacificresearch.org/events.
So thanks everyone for joining us. And here's Lance Izumi for National School Choice Week.
And I'm also really, really pleased to have with me here today three great people whom I profile in my book. We have Alicia Carter, who is the head of Pursuing Academic Choices Together Homeschool Academy at Natomas Charter School, which is located in the Sacramento area. You know that her homeschool academy is a great place of learning because she homeschools all three of her daughters at her academy. We also have with us Carrie Carlson, who is a teacher and administrator at Sequoia Grove, which is a non-classroom-based charter school network in California. Carrie is also a homeschool mom, and I profiled her and her son Garrett, who has autism and dyslexia, in my chapter on why so many parents are homeschooling their special needs children. And we're also very happy to have with us Heather Harrison today. Heather homeschools her children through Ocean Grove, which is a non-classroom-based homeschool charter school in California, and she's a member of the parent council over there. So thank you to all our panelists for being a part of our book launch webinar today and for being part of this spotlight event for National School Choice Week. So let me now tell you a little bit about my book, The Homeschool Boom, and why I wrote it. Well, first of all, I wanted to give people an understanding of the seismic shift that we're seeing in education today here in America. I think the title of my book really does actually say it all. Homeschool is booming all across our country. The U.S. Census Bureau has found that during the COVID pandemic, the proportion of families homeschooling their children has increased fourfold, rising from 5% in the spring of 2020 to a really amazing 20% just 1 year later in spring 2021. So if you think about that in terms of the actual numbers of children who are being homeschooled, in 1990, there were probably around 300,000 homeschoolers in the country. Now that number is upwards of 8 million. The pandemic has really opened parents' eyes to the great possibilities that has been afforded by homeschooling. Many parents have found out that during the pandemic that they didn't really like the one-size-fits-all curriculum and teaching methods of the regular public schools. And they were able to see that pretty up close and personal by looking over the shoulders of their kids as they were doing Zoom classes. Homeschooling gives them the chance to choose the curriculum that best fits the needs of their children. And again, rather than a Zoom class, parents can personalize the learning for their children. And also, too, they can take advantage of the incredible number of resources that are now available to homeschoolers to individualize instruction for their kids. But it's not just the curriculum and instructional tools that parents are using to individualize learning for their children. Homeschooling allows for flexible scheduling to accommodate their learning styles and activities. Also, given that federal statistics show that there were nearly 1 million violent criminal offenses at regular public schools just before COVID, homeschooling gives parents greater control over the safety of their children. Further, during the pandemic, students at regular public schools fell behind significantly in their learning. Now, recent research just came out that shows that students lost 4 to 5 months of learning in reading and math And among low-income kids, the loss was even greater, 7 months. So in comparison, research has shown over the years that homeschoolers overall have stronger academic outcomes than their peers in the regular public schools. In my book, I quote Stephen Duvall, the research director at the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and he says that during the pandemic, parents switched to homeschooling because they observed their teens experiencing better mental health, making quicker academic gains at home than they experienced in traditional schools, and feeling safer and more relaxed, and enjoying tailor-made curricula, learning environments, and flexible time schedules. But I want to emphasize that my book is not just about laying out the current state of homeschooling in America. I also want to dispel many of the myths that surround homeschooling. And I dispel those myths by telling the stories of parents, children, and educators in the homeschool movement, such as those on the stories of those panelists who we have here today. But for example, people think that homeschooling is limited to a narrow demographic in this country, and nothing really could be further from the truth. Homeschooling is really one of the most diverse education movements in America, and it embraces and encompasses every racial, ethnic, and religious category. And in fact, the Census Bureau found that homeschooling amongst African American families increased sixfold during the pandemic, going from 3% to 18%. And homeschooling amongst Hispanics tripled. So one of the first chapters in my book is about homeschooling in these minority communities. And I profile Magda Gomez, an immigrant mom from Tijuana, Mexico, and Demetria Zinga, a mom who has been named one of the top 10 African-American homeschool YouTubers in the country. So another myth that I wanted to expose is that homeschool children, and this is something that people will often believe, and it's definitely false, that homeschool children are isolated and get little or no socialization. In reality, there's a wide range of homeschool groups and entities that give homeschool children the opportunity to socialize with other kids and adults. I have a chapter on 2 homeschool moms who started a homeschool co-op together. Now, homeschool co-op is a voluntary grouping of parents who bring children together once or twice a week, maybe for learning and activities like field trips. And by the way, I would also say that one of the moms, Darcy Howard, told me that she is a flaming liberal. That's her words, a flaming liberal, while the other mom, Sarah Bailey, says that she's a conservative Christian. And the fact that they started this homeschool co-op together destroys another myth that homeschoolers only subscribe to one particular political philosophy. Now, in my book, I also counter the myth that all kids need a rigid school structure in order to learn. I have a chapter on the practice of unschooling, which my friend and homeschool expert Carrie McDonald says really tries to encourage a child's natural curiosity and creativity by allowing them to have a lot of freedom in what they learn and how they learn and at the pace at which they learn. So I profile an unschooling mom, Rachel Cheney, and her children, Justin and Rebecca. Now, I interviewed Justin, who was 12 at the time, and he told me that, now remember, this is a 12-year-old, that he was reading Alexander Solzhenitsyn's epic and complex novel, The Gulag Archipelago. I found that to just be amazing. When I asked him, what he would be reading if he was in a regular school, he told me that, well, he'd probably be reading stories about superheroes. And he told me that I want to read a book about the Soviet Gulag. And if I had to read a book about superheroes, I don't think I would like reading. So the bottom line, I believe, is that homeschooling is not just going to be the wave of the future. Homeschooling is going to be the tsunami of the future. And so, as I say in my book, the ultimate recommendation I have for policymakers is to listen to reason, listen to reality, and most of all, listen to the voices of parents and students. And that's a perfect segue, actually, for us to listen to our homeschool panelists today, who I feature in my book, and to hear what they have to say. And so what I want to do to start off our panel discussion is actually go to Alicia Carter and ask Alicia, many people think about homeschooling, that means the parent with their child 24/7 at the kitchen table. However, there are many different types of homeschooling, and including your type of charter school, which is a brick and mortar charter school, but which also has a homeschool academy. And so could you tell me about how that works, your homeschool academy at Natomas Charter School, and what types of classes you offer, and the relationship between teachers and students?
Yes, thanks, Lance. So I'm the principal of a K-8 campus in Natomas, which is part of Sacramento, and we are a homeschool support campus. And we approach homeschooling a little differently. Actually, however many programs there are, however many charter schools there are that support homeschoolers, there are that many different programs. Every program is a little bit different because homeschoolers are different and students are different, and everybody approaches education a little bit differently. And that's the beauty of homeschooling, is that you get to really individualize instruction, not just per family, but even student to student within a family. So where my campus has chosen to focus is on the idea of homeschooling and community. We really cater to families who have a desire to be deeply involved in their children's education and to pursue home instruction, but who maybe are not confident to do that on their own, or who are concerned about social opportunities, or who just want a group of people to be with to do this so that we're doing it together. So on our campus, we actually do have a building that is a resource center. And our families come here to meet with the credentialed teacher who is assigned to them as part of the requirements of charter school participation in independent study, is that you work under the supervisory expertise of a credentialed teacher. So they come here to meet with that teacher. They come here to access resources. We have a curriculum library. We have a regular library. We have spaces where families can come and work during the day. And then we also provide elective classes here. So we centralize all of our electives. In some programs, families go about the community to engage in those, and we have brought them in-house. So our staff provide a wide variety. This semester, we're a little bit low on what we're offering, but we're still offering 65 different courses for K-8 students. So we have an art teacher, a music teacher, fitness classes, a technology teacher. And what we believe that this does is that it provides students with that flexibility of in-home instruction for their general education, that their parents have a lot of flexibility, but also provides that community aspect where they can come together. They see the same kids in their different workshops, so they can build relationships. The workshops are mixed age, so they still get that what I call one of the superpowers of homeschooling, which is learning to interact with people of various age levels, not just to be with the kids who are all born your year. They get to experience in chunks the experience of school. And so it's kind of just that hybrid balance of home instruction and in person. Did I get everything? What else?
Yeah. Well, and let me ask you real quickly as a quick follow-up, Alicia, is that, so you said that you have workspaces for parents. Mm-hmm. So could you just say a few words about what that means?
Yeah, so our building is set up so that like in my case, I have multiple children who school here, and I can take no credit. My parents and my husband are the ones homeschooling them. I just sign the paperwork over here. And so when a family comes in, often we're homeschooling whole families. So let's say that your second grader is in an art class, but you've got a fifth grader and an eighth grader. We have a lunchroom, some hub spaces, tables in the library where you can sit and do a math lesson or read a book or work on, so that while one student is in a workshop, your other students are still moving forward. Or all your kids are in a workshop, but you don't want to drive home. You can hang out and do your paperwork, or I don't know, read a book for yourself, maybe for a few minutes, do something like that. So it just provides kind of that opportunity. And in a non-COVID year, a lot of the power of our program is the conversations parents have in those spaces, that they're, they all have kids in a second, third, fourth grade art workshop the kids are all there, and the parents are sharing ideas like, what are you doing for history? How are you addressing fractions? I have no idea what I'm doing. And they get together and collaborate. Our staff members hang out when they're not in meetings or teaching classes to support those families. So it just kind of provides space. Time and space is what homeschooling is all about. And it provides that space for people to connect, to build relationships, because we all do better when we have a community, whether that's online or in person or, local, to share that burden and to grow from the knowledge of a group.
Well, that's great. No, I think that's important. And I think it's also important to, underscore that, because people often wonder, how do parents who may have to do work during the day also balance that with homeschooling their children? And, something like what you offer there at your Homeschool Academy helps in that way. So let me go to Carrie now, and ask you now, as opposed to Alicia's classroom-based charter Homeschool Academy, now you are a teacher and an administrator at a non-classroom based homeschool charter school. So could you tell us about this type of homeschooling, how it works, and what your responsibilities are as a teacher there?
Yeah, so we operate what is called an independent study charter completely. So we don't have physical buildings where our students will come and meet. We do take advantage of places like libraries and also like parks and other outdoor spaces, but we don't have physical brick and mortar spaces where we meet. We do also have a robust virtual academy that spans all grade levels, TK through 12. And we were doing online schooling through virtual academies pre-pandemic as well. So we kind of led the way, I think, when it comes to that. But a lot of similarities, and I just love how Alicia talks about, as there's so many different types of homeschoolers, there's so many different types of programs. And so you can really have the opportunity to shop around and find out what program is going to work best for your family or your students. As far as my role as a teacher in our program, our families are actually provided with instructional funding. So our school does not make the decision for families on curriculum or classes that they would take. So instead of that, each student is allotted a specific amount of funding that they can use throughout the year to purchase curriculum or attend classes with local vendors that would support their individualized learning plan. Those vendors and curriculum are, of course, a part of approved lists so that we can make sure that we are compliant with state and other government policies and making sure that, we're using public funds wisely. As a teacher, I meet with my students and their families every 20 school days. And that is in order to monitor their progress and make sure that they're making good progress towards grade level standards. Also to help them if they said, we're struggling with math, and I might offer them another math curriculum, or, these are the books that I want to read. Can you help me get those? Or do you have any other suggestions? So we really act as a facilitator or a guide. In our model, the parents are the primary learning coach, however, but that does not mean that they're sitting down with their student on a one-to-one with the kid at the desk with the blackboard or whiteboard or whatever you're using, actually providing that instruction. They're facilitating the instruction. So they might be looking for, an algebra teacher that would cover that content, and then that's what they would use their instructional funding for. And that is basically how our program works. I did read Heather's bio, and I think she can probably go a little bit more into detail because I think she's a family that uses one of our homeschooling models like we do, that can provide that opportunity or insight. That's the word.
And I think that's a perfect segue, Carrie, into asking Heather, you and your children actually were using a wide variety of homeschool experiences, or went through a variety of homeschool experiences. So could you first tell us about your oldest daughter's, her particular struggles in the regular public schools, and then tell us about your journey through I think you went through a homeschool umbrella school, co-ops, and then to a non-classroom based homeschool charter school, which is where you are right now.
Yes. So my oldest daughter was traditionally in, a traditional public school, a very good school in the Bay Area, and she struggled. We went through the normal avenues to try and help identify what was causing her to struggle with reading and math. And through several years, realized that the public school was very limited in what they were able to do to help and assist our daughter. From our end, my husband and I took her to many different tutoring clubs. Khan Academy was one of them. We had a young lady who was a high school student, a neighbor of ours, come and help her. Obviously, I tried to help her, and she just continued to struggle. Unfortunately, the public school sort of threw their hands up and just said, our only option at this point is to hold her back. They were unable to identify any specific reason as to why she was struggling. And at that point, a good friend of mine had schooling her children and said, hey, why don't you just read some books? And so she suggested some, and that's what I did. I started reading about homeschool and realizing that, hey, my daughter would come home every day crying in tears, telling me that she was stupid and couldn't do it. And so I would sit down with her and try and help her. And I thought, gosh, if I'm sitting down with my daughter and trying to help her for 3 hours after school, I can most certainly pull her out of school and do this in a positive way. And that's what we did. We ended her 3rd grade year out of school, and then decided to jump head first into homeschooling. I was petrified, but like I said, I had done my research and read a lot. And of course I had a friend who had already been homeschooling and had several homeschooling friends. Initially, when I did pull her out, we did start with what's called a satellite or umbrella school. They keep your grades for you so that you have that nice cum file. And that had the adjunct of having an HSLDA membership. If those who don't know what that is, that's Homeschool Legal Defense System. And after that, another friend, as I started to branch out and Google search and find other groups, I found wonderful co-ops, and through those co-ops segued into, hey, have you heard about Ocean Grove? It's really great. And that's how we landed there. And it's been a great decision. Homeschooling through a charter school, I would highly recommend for parents. The resources, as Carrie would know, are incredible, especially if you have a child that has any kind of struggle. It really helps to have that resource behind you.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that that's an important thing. Some parents, want to do homeschooling totally independent, which is one model. But then people think that's the only model. There are other models like the ones that the three of you are talking about, where you have a charter school which does offer support in different sorts of ways. So, I think that's important for people to understand that there are all these different kind of delivery systems for homeschooling. Let me tell all our audience right now too that I would love to have some of you ask questions as well, and to remind you that to submit your questions using the Zoom Q&A function. So if you do have any questions, please, feel free to do that, and we'll try to save about 10 minutes at the end of our webinar to be able to have our panelists answer questions from all of you. But let me get back to Alicia right now. I think it would surprise people that homeschool charter schools like yours offer specialized classes in things such as special education and psychological services. So could you tell us about these types of things that you offer?
Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, I did an information night just last night for parents applying to different schools. And this question came up multiple times. Like, what if my kid needs speech? What if I need a counselor? What if I have special education? What if I have an IEP or a 504? So the bottom line is that charter schools are public schools in the state of California, which means that all charter schools are required to provide services to students who need them. So it's not just will we, it's we must support your child. And so we do. And of course, there are varying ways that this gets done. And every model, again, chooses how they do that. I am very, very blessed to be in an organization with Natomas Charter School where I have sister campuses that are site-based programs, and we get to piggyback on their services. So we actually have our own staff here. I have 2 full-time special education teachers, a part-time speech therapist, a counselor, a psychologist, an OT. And those people all work for us. And so we get a lot of control over schedule and can really make things fit. But even when you don't have those things, charter schools who serve homeschooling students do work with contractors. They work with their local districts. All of those things are part of that plan and are available. Now, there are some caveats in independent study law that do require a team to meet when your child has special education services and to go through that IEP and say, is homeschooling going to meet the needs of this child? And that's one of those places where families have to decide when you're taking on a public charter school for homeschooling. If your child does have a significant degree of need, they might say to you, like, this program isn't going to be a good fit. You need more intervention than you can get during the traditional homeschooling day, and we'll help you find another fit. You also, though, do have the option to go with the private school affidavit, which is to homeschool outside of a charter school as a private school, where you get a little more control over how that looks. Even then, if your kid has an IEP, you do have access to services through your district of residence. So if you live in California and you have a kid who needs help, there is a way to get it. If you don't know how to get it, talk to an administrator, because I promise you, I spent a lot of my time figuring out how to get kids to those services. And I'm sure that these other ladies do the same. There is an abundance of support. There are an abundance of resources. And then again, it's going to look different program to program. So for my campus, our students who have those kinds of services come and receive them on our site. They're done in person. They're done in our building. And so that's a little different. Each program, they might be offsite. Some programs have always had virtual services. Some programs are doing virtual right now. It just depends on which program. And this is why really shopping the programs and figuring out what's going to work for your kid and your family is so important, is because I guarantee you there's a program that's going to fit.
And no, that's terrific. And I mean, that's a great response. I think it's for people who have never heard of a private school affidavit, that is the paperwork that you fill out here in California, which basically declares your home as a private school, and then you homeschool your child independently. And so you're not enrolled in a homeschool charter school, for example.
It's no longer public school. You're in private school.
That's exactly right. So your home is a private school.
I will say, and I know that you're kind of heading this direction, but as far as special education is concerned, the PACT program I work for has actually existed for 25 years, and we have always had a significant population of IEP students. But very consistently over the last 5 years, 25% of my students are on IEPs. So not only do we provide them, that's kind of what we do over here. We are really very frequently working with families who are choosing to homeschool children who have needs beyond the traditional needs.
And I think that's a really important thing to emphasize is, and because again, people think that kids who have special needs, that their only alternative is a regular public school, when it's so many kids with special needs actually thrive much better through homeschooling. And so Carrie, now you have a son named Garrett who has special needs, and you decide to homeschool, and many people automatically assume that, again, that parents who homeschool cannot homeschool special needs children. But it turns out that homeschooling offered the opportunity for individualized learning that allowed your special needs child to thrive. So could you tell us about Garrett and what his special needs were and are, and why you decided to homeschool him, and particularly, what your school principal and your neurologist actually advised?
Yeah. So before I start like dispelling myths that you started with at the very beginning, I would also like to dispel the myth. I am a credentialed teacher, but that did not in any way, shape, or form more qualify me to homeschool my special needs child than any parent, a parent without these credentials. So just because I had one, it probably passed the mother-in-law test a little bit easier in that my mother-in-law didn't question it as much, but otherwise you are just as qualified to homeschool your children with or without a teaching credential, including those with special needs, because you know your child best. And so that is the first thing I would like to say. But to talk a little bit about Garrett. So Garrett now is 18 years old. He is a recent high school graduate, and he is incredible. A little bit of mom bias probably, but Garrett was diagnosed with autism and processing disabilities, including dyslexia. He was in the public school system at age 5. He started in kindergarten, and he did 6 months in kindergarten before an unfortunate circumstance required us to relocate mid-year. And so he enrolled, or we moved him to a new school where he started kindergarten the second half of the year. And he really, really struggled to adapt to that new environment. My plan actually was to just pull him out for the second half of that year and restart him in kindergarten the following year. But similar to Heather, I dove straight like head first into researching homeschooling during that time. And we traveled down the path of actually unschooling, believe it or not. And that was because of the advice of his neurologist and the school principal. So that second half of the year, kindergarten, it led to a series of tests and appointments to help diagnose Garrett with his disabilities. And I remember specifically meeting with the neurologist who shared that he was neurodiverse and that he would never really learn the way that most classrooms were set up. That wasn't the best environment for him. And so what he actually recommended was to, and these were his words, I quote, to keep him as far away from classrooms and therapists as possible, but to actually go to museums, to read to him extensively, to play, to explore, and let him lead the learning. And being a classroom teacher that was used to very structured environment, it kind of blew my mind. I was like, okay, how is this going to even work out? But again, I just started doing the research. I read about self-directed learning and unschooling, and I was hooked. I did approach his principal at the time, who had been my boss as well. So I knew him on a personal level because he had been my boss and was my son's principal. And he said he had never in his life encouraged anyone to homeschool before, but he would fully support me homeschooling Garrett and felt like if anyone could do it, I could. And so that being said, we made the decision, and basically the biggest reason was because we could adapt the environment to fit his needs, and focusing on his interests to motivate and encourage him, and not somebody else's predisposed and prescribed standards, was exactly what Garrett needed to thrive.
Oh, that's great. Well, let me go to Heather now, so tell me more, Heather, about the homeschool experience of your children through Ocean Grove, which is this non-classroom based charter school that we've talked about. You receive an amount of funding that from which you can then make your own choices about which services to get for your children from an approved list of vendors. So could you tell me about this funding, what sorts of choices that you make, why you make them, and how this helps out somebody like you, especially people from a lower income family?
That's a great question. Obviously, Carrie knows about this format from maybe more of an administrator standpoint, but for someone like myself, it allowed a whole world of resources that we wouldn't at that time be able to afford. Things like tutoring, specialized instruction, and things like, again, as a homeschooling parent, prior to doing that, I did a lot of research. And just like Carrie, there was that decompression time when I pulled my daughter out of school. And again, the best advice, not a psychologist, but someone gave me, was not to do public school at home. You're a homeschooler, so you can adapt and change and create that environment. And with that, a lot of research, I realized things like music, like the Suzuki method, and arts, and learning-led or interest-led type activities, which, because we had Ocean Grove available to us, we were able to find vendors that taught violin or guitar or whatever it is that my daughter was interested in at the time, and be able to afford things like that. Dance, gymnastics. My oldest daughter was gifted in gymnastics. These things, even though they're physical activities or music, help the brain to develop and move forward in ways that maybe not every child needs necessarily, but my daughter needed it. And it was a huge, huge blessing to have that, those funds to be able to do that, and to get tutoring, like in areas like math and reading, to have that one-on-one with somebody really helped her to get past that. And it truly helped. My oldest daughter is still an avid reader, which it still astounds me that she went from not being able to read to loving books. And I think she said her favorite place is the library, So it is, for lower income families, charter schools are absolutely invaluable. If you can imagine a student, say my student was still in, my daughter was still in public school, and she needed all these resources, but there was just no way to have access to that. It opens up that world. Just because you are of low income, not mean that you are not able to homeschool. A lot of parents that I know that are lower income, maybe the mother works part-time in the evening, the dad works during the day, and so they're able to switch off schooling their child. And then when you add in the component of, say, Ocean Grove, for example, it adds in that secondary level of teaching. So for example, for myself, I work part-time, I homeschool during the day, but I also, using Ocean Grove funds, I'm able to sign up my other daughters for classes in a co-op. And they teach science and history and art and cooking and ballet and what else? All these great things that my children are able to take. And it sort of helps to lessen the load for me, instruction wise. And I'm able to go and work and do these things and still provide what I consider to be a high level of education and enrichment.
I think that's a real important point you make, Heather, about how your experience through Ocean Grove allows you to balance your work life with homeschooling. Again, I think that's one of the big things that people have questions about, is that, okay, homeschooling sounds terrific, but how am I going to balance being able to earn a living with also homeschooling my children? And that there are these different models out there that allow for people to be able to, especially now with COVID, where people's work schedules are much more flexible than they used to be, that you're able to balance both the needs of your work life and your homeschooling. So let me ask each one of you one last round of questions, and then we'll go to our questions from our audience. Alicia, let's get back a little bit to this issue of curriculum and the ability of parents to choose the curriculum that best meets the needs of their individual child, and how homeschooling offers that great advantage to these parents. Now, that is a great opportunity for parents, but it's also a challenge because how do parents choose a curriculum? What types of curriculums are out there? It turns out, in my research for this book, there are hundreds of homeschool curricula out there. So how does someplace like your Homeschool Academy at your charter school help parents in this area of curriculum?
Yeah, definitely. So, and this is a topic right now, because let me tell you, what this was last year is not what this is this year. So a little history, a little explanation there. As a California public school, and with all of the changes, there were some really significant legislative changes this past July in response to distance learning and virtual learning and independent study programs. The state has tightened the reins on that. So The official answer is that homeschooling children need to have access to curriculum that is very similar to what their site-based peers would get. And so when we're selecting what goes in our, in my case, again, we have a curriculum library, and families usually choose from a selection that we have. So for example, we pick out 5 or 6 different math programs that we feel are really strong. And most families pick from that. We help them. That helps with that overwhelm. You're not looking at every math program. These are ones we vetted as being solid programs. Having said that, if a family feels very strongly that they want to use another material, we take a look at it with them and say, like, yeah, that's a great plan for you and your family. Let's do that. So there is flexibility within that. As a public school, we are held to the legal requirements that the things we purchase or that we offer to families have to meet public standards. So they can't be religiously backed. They need to be public school friendly materials. So the reason that this has become so different in this last year is we used to have more flexibility, but the requirements now are really that we are doing everything possible to ensure that students are making what they call adequate educational progress. It's like my favorite words right now, moving forward, but also recognizing that when a school district adopts a book, let's say a math book or a history book, that they are picking one thing for an entire grade level of children, or even an entire school of children, and that might not work. For example, my 3 daughters are in 2 different math programs. 2 of them use one math program, and the third one uses a different one because it's just her learning style. So we have flexibility in that. And then finally, when a family comes in where the child has special needs or a different program, we have a process by which they can request something outside of what we usually offer. Often those are approved. Sometimes they're not. So we just meet each family where they are and try to adjust. But again, it really comes back to that time and space. We provide as much support as we can, and then also honor the fact that sometimes a family or a child needs something different. And then we look at the plan and say, how can we meet that need, and how do we do that?
No, that's good. I mean, I think it's important to understand that even though a charter school is a public school, publicly funded anyway, that there still is our choices, curriculum choices that you can make within the charter school setting, much more so than in a regular public school, which is much more of a one size fits all. But again, parents then have to then make that decision. Is that, do they want even more flexibility? In which case they might go the independent homeschooling route. So let me ask Carrie now, with Garrett and his special needs, what was Garrett's kind of day-to-day learning experience like? When I talked with you and with Garrett, you talked about how you structured the day so that Garrett could learn his best, and you used different tools like audiobooks that were very helpful for Garrett because he had a huge comprehension ability, and but because of dyslexia, regular books were a challenge for him. So tell me, what things you use, how you found them to help Garrett learn his best.
Yeah, so really, honestly, one of the biggest benefits of homeschooling for Garrett was being able to adjust the environment. And a lot of times that is, especially for kids with special needs, that simple environment adjustment is all they need to be successful. But that takes on that, adjusting that environment can happen in many, many different ways. One is the schedule. And I loved the homeschool schedule for Garrett because sleep is a huge, I want to say issue. It might not be the right word, but for kids, especially those with learning disabilities, you'll often find that they have difficulties sleeping. And then you add a traditional school schedule into that was really created to cater to the parent work life and not to developmental sleep schedules. It can actually cause so many problems that just adequate sleep resolves. And so allowing him to sleep and to get on his own schedule was really, really beneficial. Also, he was allowed to take frequent breaks. So he worked very well and very focused in 15 to 20 minute spurts. And then he would take like a 5 to 10 minute break. And so you can't do that in a classroom environment when you have 25 to 30 students. It doesn't work that way. And so you're an hour and a half and then a 15-minute recess or whatever. So the fact that he could adjust according to what he needed. And then extended time. So as much as he needed frequent breaks, he also would often need extended time. So what some kids could finish in 15 minutes, he might need 45 minutes, but he wasn't held to that type of a rigid schedule. So that environment adjustment was huge. And then what you talked about, the assistive technology. So he did allow and still reads audiobooks. Garrett's audiobook library, I think I looked just the other day, was up to something like 230 books. It's insane. And most of them he's read more than once. Speech to text is a big one for him. He loves his dictation programs, and then video instruction. So he learns very, very well. We call it YouTube University around here, but he learns very well watching videos and processing information that way. So, being in this environment has really allowed us to pick those assistive technology pieces that help supplement and give him what he needs.
Yeah, I remember one of the great things that when I interviewed Garrett, he said that that he had read through audiobooks the massive 1,000-page trilogy of The Lord of the Rings, which is like my favorite work of fiction, and he read that through the audiobook when he was 8 years old or so. And I just think that's incredible. Let me ask one last question to Heather, and then we'll go to our Q&A from our audience. Heather, with regard to curriculum, how did you choose the curriculum for your kids when you were homeschooling?
That's a good question, because there's been an evolution. As any homeschool parent knows, when you first start looking into curriculum, your head wants to explode and you are not sure what to do. But the first step I took was to try and identify my children's learning styles. All of them seem to be very kinesthetic, auditory, visual. And from there, having that knowledge, I also chose curriculum that was easy for me to teach, because let me tell you, as a parent, it doesn't matter. It's important your child's learning style, but if you don't feel like you have mastery over what you're teaching, you will not implement it well. So my advice is, if you have a curriculum that you're comfortable with, and you don't, like, for example, I started off with Rod and Staff. Not many people are going to know what that is. It's a Mennonite English program. For whatever reason, I was able to teach that well. That doesn't necessarily lend itself to someone who has learning disabilities or things like that. But what I was able to do was adapt it, because I was good at teaching it. I was able to work it so that my children could understand it better. And my oldest daughter is very good with English now, even though she struggled with reading and math. And then now, as I've moved through many years of homeschooling, I've come to be aware of a company or an organization called NACD, which is National Association for Childhood Development. And what they've been able to do is help to diagnose my children a little bit better and refined. And now they choose the curriculum for me based on their needs at the time. So if you have a feeling that your child might have some learning difficulties, I recommend that you get involved with an organization that can help you identify those and choose curriculum and teach you how to implement it with videos. Because I love to watch things on YouTube, and they have this particular organization has many videos on how to implement their programs. But definitely my personal belief is, find your child's learning style, find your teaching style and what you can teach well and effectively, and then you should have a home run.
That's great. That's great. Now let's go to our questions from our audience. I think Tim is going to be handling that for us.
Yes, so we have a question from Steve here, who says he's curious about the high school transition plan for young homeschoolers. Are there technical and trade school options in addition to kind of the traditional college prep curriculum?
I don't know if anyone particular wants to answer that. Maybe Alicia, and you might want to take a crack at that one.
I can take a little bit of a crack at it. I ended 8th grade, so I don't actually deal with high school. There's a reason for that. And it is all those graduation requirements. There are, however, many options for homeschoolers in as far as virtual schools, hybrid schools. Just down the road, as part of Natomas Charter School, we have a virtual learning academy, which isn't actually virtual. We called it that long before virtual learning, but it is a hybrid program where students come in, they do part of their learning virtually and part on site. And that's a very college prep pathway. In the Sacramento area, one of the places that many of our 8th graders attend is SAVA, which is the Sacramento Area Vocational Academy. And it is a hybrid style vocational focused high school pathway. I have a 7th grader. I have 1 year to figure out where I'm sending my homeschooler. So I'm researching these a lot right now. And then there are many, many online options, many pathways for dual enrollment with community college as well, where students who are homeschooling can avail themselves of vocational type trainings. Again, the options are limited only by your creativity and how much pounding the pavement you can do to find the right thing. So yes, many, many, many options, and research is key.
Let me ask real quickly, Heather, I mean, you have a list of approved vendors from which you can choose all kinds of different services. I mean, are there like vocational or, types of
Absolutely, yeah.
services available?
Yeah, so my oldest daughter is 22. She is one class away from getting her criminal justice degree. And we did not go the 4-year route. What we did was she did dual enrollment with a junior college and was able to take classes simultaneously her senior year and earn those college credits. Now, what that allows us to do is Ocean Grove obviously pays for those classes. And so that helped us a lot. And then she was able to utilize those things. So if you have a junior college nearer to you that offers vocational type things like cosmetology or auto mechanics or any of those types of things, at least I can speak for my charter school, offers that dual enrollment so that your child, if they don't want to go the 4-year university route, has available to them. And we utilized those.
I think that's important. Well, I tell you what, let me ask a question of my own here. So what is your advice, since we're coming down to the very end of our webinar here, what do you consider to be the best advice for for people who are thinking about homeschooling their children, but who are on the fence about whether to do so or not? So let me go first let's go to Heather first. And what would you give as advice to somebody who is really, 50-50 on it?
That's a really good question. My first piece of advice would be to ask yourself, why are you considering homeschooling, and write a list. Obviously, that was for me personally, reason number one. I need to keep my child safe. Number two, academics. Are you deciding to homeschool because you feel that the academics are not up to par, and you don't feel that there's going to be any resolution? Those are examples of things that parents might be considering as to why they want to homeschool. And then I would research it. Research what's available to you locally. Are there homeschool groups? Are there, gosh, you guys all know there's all kinds of things. There's so many different learning and homeschool styles and groups that coordinate with those. And so if you're on the fence, do your research, identify why you need to homeschool and the resources available for those to answer or to remedy those situations, and go for it. I would encourage anybody to at least try it for 6 months and see how it goes. But you want to make sure that if you do decide to do it, that you are prepared ahead of time. If you have that goal, prepare for that goal. Find the resources around you. Do your research. Find curriculum that you feel will suit you and your child.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. Let me ask then, like a real quick response from each of you. What do you see, from your various vantage points about homeschooling going forward? Do you think that, this boom that we're talking about will continue in the future, even after the pandemic is over? And, what do you see as, challenges on the horizon? So let me go with Carrie first, and we'll just go around. Carrie, what do you think?
Oh, gosh. Can Heather answer this? Her last answer was so phenomenal. Gosh, so what do I see? Do I see it slowing down? No, I don't. I actually see it continuing. And then I'm sorry, tell me, what was the second part of that?
And then, do you see any challenges, on the horizon for homeschooling?
I see challenges to the flexibility that the more, Alicia kind of alluded to it, as it's proven to be more and more successful, there's been more and more brains tightening down on it and more restrictions, which is kind of shocking to me, sort of. And homeschooling works because of the flexibility. Homeschooling works because of the opportunities and the choice. And for whatever reason, different agencies get fearful or something, and they come in with more and more policies. And that's only going to hurt our movement. It's not going to help it. But I guess there's a challenge there because homeschoolers and administrators and teachers in this arena are creative. And we will continue to be creative within this more and more restrictive environment if it continues. But that would be my biggest fear and challenge from an administrative perspective on what could happen to homeschooling.
Thank you. We've reached now our 12 noon, and I think that was a perfect answer. That's exactly what I see, Carrie. And so I want to thank each one of our panelists, Carrie Carlson, Alicia Carter, Heather Harrison, for being part of our launch today for my new book, The Homeschool Boom, and read their stories. Heather, Alicia, and Carrie's stories are in this book. So I urge all our viewers to, get a copy of the book and, and read about all their stories in greater detail. And I want to thank everybody who have tuned in today. Happy National School Choice Week to everyone. And I look forward, PRI certainly looks forward to continuing our partnership with all of you in the future and pushing forward school choice for all Californians and all Americans. So thank you so much.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.